The blood-red sunset painted Sarah Blackburn's face as she raced across the Arizona territory, the thundering hooves of her mare barely audible over her pounding heart. Every shadow on the horizon made her flinch. Every distant sound caused her to glance nervously over her shoulder. She'd been running for 3 days straight, ever since she'd slipped away from the ranch outside Tucson while Vernon slept off his whiskey rage. "Can't keep running forever," she whispered to her exhausted horse as Fort McDowell appeared in the distance, its scattered buildings a promise of temporary sanctuary. The year was 1879, and for Sarah, aged 22, freedom tasted like dust and fear. The letter from her cousin, tucked inside her bodice, promised work at the town's only hotel. What it couldn't promise was that Vernon wouldn't find her, as he had the last 2 times she tried to escape. The bruises had finally faded from those attempts. The ones on her soul never would. As Sarah rode down the main street, she felt the stares of the townsfolk. A woman alone always drew attention, especially one with a split lip barely healed and eyes that couldn't stop darting around in fear. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her dress was plain and dusty from the journey. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth or status, just desperation. The Ironwood Hotel stood at the far end of town, a 2-story wooden structure that had seen better days but still maintained a certain frontier dignity. Sarah dismounted, her legs nearly buckling beneath her from exhaustion. "You must be Meredith's cousin," came a voice from the porch. Sarah turned to see a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes. "Mrs. Jensen?" "Yes, I'm Sarah Blackburn." "Get inside, child. You look like you've ridden through hell itself." "Something like that," Sarah murmured, following the woman into the hotel. The lobby was simple but clean, with a wooden check-in desk and a modest seating area. Mrs. Jensen led her through to the kitchen at the back. "Meredith told me some of your situation," the older woman said, pouring Sarah a cup of coffee. "Said your husband has a tendency to find you." Sarah's hands trembled around the warm mug. "Vernon has connections. Seems like everywhere I go, someone knows him or owes him. Last time I made it all the way to Prescott before he dragged me back." Mrs. Jensen's expression hardened. "Well, you'll work here, room and board included. But I won't lie to you, Fort McDowell isn't big enough to hide in forever." "I just need time to save enough to get to California," Sarah said. "My mama had family there before she passed." "You'll start tomorrow. For now, rest. Your room's upstairs, last door on the left." Sarah nodded gratefully and made her way up the creaking stairs. The room was tiny, with just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the stable. But it was clean, and it was hers. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears come. 3 months, she promised herself. 3 months to save enough money, and then she'd be on her way to San Francisco, where Vernon Blackburn's reach surely couldn't extend. Dawn broke harsh and golden over the desert landscape. Sarah had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and listening to the town come alive. She dressed quickly in the plain black dress Mrs. Jensen had provided for hotel staff and pinned her hair into a tight bun. The woman she saw in the small mirror looked tired but determined. The work was hard but straightforward cleaning rooms, serving meals, washing linens. By midday, her back ached and her hands were raw, but Sarah welcomed the pain. It was honest pain, not the kind Vernon inflicted. "You're a good worker," Mrs. Jensen commented as Sarah scrubbed the lobby floor. "Quick learner, too." "My mama taught me to keep a clean house," Sarah replied, not mentioning that Vernon had expected perfection and delivered punishment when he didn't find it. The days fell into a rhythm. Sarah worked from sunrise until well after sunset, took her meals in the kitchen, and kept to herself. The hotel guests barely noticed her, just another young woman in a frontier town where women were scarce. A few traveling salesmen made advances, but Mrs. Jensen was quick to shut them down. "That girl's had enough trouble with men," Sarah overheard her telling one persistent drummer. "You leave her be or find another hotel." By the end of her second week, Sarah had almost begun to relax. The constant looking over her shoulder diminished slightly. The money she was saving, hidden in a small pouch sewn into her mattress, was growing. Maybe, just maybe, Vernon wouldn't find her this time. It was a Tuesday afternoon when he walked in. Not Vernon Sarah would have recognized his heavy tread anywhere. This man was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a storm-washed sky. He wore the practical clothes of a cattleman denim pants, a cotton shirt open at the collar, and a vest that had seen better days. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the merciless sun. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the ambient noise of the hotel lobby. "Need a room for a few nights." Sarah froze, the broom in her hand forgotten. There was something about him not threatening, but intense, that made her instinctively wary. "Of course, sir," Mrs. Jensen responded from behind the desk. "Just yourself?" "Just me. Name's Hayes. Hayes Calloway." Sarah forced herself to continue sweeping, but kept her face turned away. Men like him, capable-looking, strong, were often friends with men like Vernon. Her husband had many such acquaintances spread across the territory, eyes and ears always alert for news of his runaway wife. "Room's $1 a night," Mrs. Jensen was saying, "includes breakfast. Dinner's extra, served at 6 sharp." "Fair enough." His boots scuffed against the wooden floor as he approached the desk. Sarah could feel his gaze sweep over her briefly, then move on. Just another maid, not worth noticing. She exhaled slowly. "Sarah, would you show Mr. Calloway to room 3? Mrs. Jensen called. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. So much for being invisible. "Yes, madam," she managed, setting aside her broom. She led the way up the stairs without meeting his eyes, painfully aware of his presence behind her. His spurs jingled softly with each step. "Here you are, sir," she said, opening the door to a modest but clean room. "Washroom's at the end of the hall. Dinner bell rings at 6. He nodded his thanks, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. "You're not from around here," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, sir." Sarah kept her eyes on the floor. "Neither am I," he replied, then stepped into the room and closed the door. Sarah stood there for a moment, her heart racing inexplicably. There had been no recognition in his eyes, no indication that he knew Vernon. But something about Hayes Calloway unsettled her, and not entirely in a frightening way. She hurried back downstairs, determined to avoid him as much as possible during his stay. That resolve lasted until dinner. Sarah was serving in the dining room when Hayes came down, taking a table in the corner where he could see both the front door and the window to the street. A habit of caution she recognized all too well. "Just coffee and whatever's hot," he told her when she approached his table. "Stew and biscuits tonight," Sarah replied, still not meeting his eyes. "Sounds fine." When she returned with his meal, he surprised her by asking, "Where are you from originally, miss?" Sarah nearly dropped the plate. "Tucson," she answered automatically, then wished she hadn't. The less anyone knew about her, the better. "Long way from home." "This is home now," she said firmly, and turned to leave. "My apologies," he said, stopping her. "Didn't mean to pry." There was something in his tone, a genuine contrition, that made Sarah finally look at him directly. His eyes weren't just gray. They had flecks of blue in them, like the sky breaking through storm clouds. "No offense taken," she said softly, then hurried away. Later that night, after the dining room was closed and cleaned, Sarah stepped outside for a rare moment alone. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the vast darkness like diamonds on black velvet. She leaned against the hotel's back wall, breathing deeply. Beautiful night. Sarah jumped at the voice, spinning to find Hayes Calloway standing a few feet away, smoking a cigarette. The ember glowed orange in the darkness. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "Seems I keep startling you." "It's fine," she replied, though her heart was racing. "I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, but gently, not commanding. "I wanted to apologize again for earlier. A man learns not to ask too many questions out here." Sarah hesitated. "It's really all right, Mr. Calloway." "Hayes," he corrected. Mr. Calloway was my father, and he was not a man I care to be compared to. The bitterness in his voice was familiar. It echoed her own when she thought of Vernon. What brings you to Fort McDowell? She asked, surprising herself with the question. Hayes took a long drag of his cigarette before answering. Cattle business, mostly. Got a small spread about 20 miles north of here. Come into town every few weeks for supplies, and he trailed off. And to remember what other humans sound like, he finished with a small smile. Gets lonely out there sometimes. Against her better judgment, Sarah felt herself smiling back. I can imagine. What about you? What brought you to this dust patch of a town? The question doused her momentary warmth like cold water. I should really get back inside, she said, stepping toward the door. Hayes didn't try to stop her. Good night, then, Miss... Sarah, she supplied reluctantly. Good night, Mr. Calloway. Inside, Sarah leaned against the closed door, heart hammering. What was she doing, chatting with a strange man in the dark? If Vernon ever found out. But Vernon wasn't here, and Hayes Calloway, with his storm-cloud eyes and quiet voice, was nothing like her husband. Vernon was bull-like, all bulk and rage and alcohol-fueled violence. Hayes moved with the careful grace of a man accustomed to conserving energy in a harsh environment. Still, she resolved to be more careful. 3 more months and she'd be gone from this place. She couldn't afford distractions or mistakes. For the next 2 days, Sarah managed to avoid direct interaction with Hayes, swapping duties with another maid so she wouldn't have to serve his table or clean his room. But on the 3rd evening, as she was returning from hanging laundry in the backyard, she rounded the corner of the building and crashed directly into his solid chest. Whoa there, he said, steadying her with hands on her shoulders. You all right? Sarah stepped back quickly, out of his reach. Yes, I'm fine, excuse me. You've been avoiding me, he said bluntly. I've been working, she corrected, trying to step around him. Hayes didn't move. Have I done something to offend you, Sarah? No, she admitted. I don't make a habit of getting friendly with hotel guests. Fair enough, he nodded. Then reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I'm heading back to my ranch tomorrow, but I'll be in town again next month. If you ever need anything at all, you can get word to me through Sam at the general store. Sarah stared at the paper he was holding out, making no move to take it. Why would I need anything from you? Hayes's expression turned serious. Because you're running from something, or someone, and sometimes a person needs a friend when that happens. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. You look over your shoulder every time you hear a horse on the street. You flinch when men raise their voices, and you've got that look in your eyes. I've seen it before, on my mother's face. Sarah snatched the paper from his hand, crumpling it in her fist. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, he said quietly. And I know what it's like to grow up watching your father beat your mother until she couldn't stand. I know what it's like to be helpless to stop it. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. Please stop. Hayes stepped back, giving her space. I'm not trying to upset you. I just want you to know there's help if you need it. No strings attached. Why? Sarah demanded, her voice breaking. Why would you help a stranger? Because no one helped my mother, he replied simply. And she died waiting for someone too. With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Sarah clutching the paper with his ranch's location written on it, tears streaming down her face. That night, she lay awake, turning Hayes' words over in her mind. How had he seen through her so easily? Was she that transparent, or was he unusually perceptive? Either way, it frightened her. If he could see her secret, others might too. But there had been no judgment in his eyes, no pity, just understanding and an offer of help. Sarah couldn't remember the last time someone had offered her help without wanting something in return. When morning came, she watched from her window as Hayes loaded his supplies into saddlebags and mounted his horse. Just before riding away, he glanced up at the hotel, as if sensing her presence. Sarah stepped back from the window quickly, but not before their eyes met briefly. He nodded once, then rode out of town. The days passed more slowly after Hayes left. Sarah threw herself into her work, saving every penny and counting the days until she could leave for California. 62 days to go, then 50, then 45. It was on a cold October morning, with just 43 days remaining, that her world shattered. She was sweeping the front porch when a familiar black horse came trotting down the main street. Even at a distance, she would have recognized Vernon's stallion anywhere, a massive, mean-spirited animal that matched its owner perfectly. Sarah dropped the broom and ran inside, nearly colliding with Mrs. Jensen. "He's here," she gasped. "My husband. Please, I can't." Understanding immediately, Mrs. Jensen grabbed her arm. "Back door. Go to the livery stable and ask for Jeb. Tell him I sent you. He'll hide you." Sarah fled through the kitchen and out the back door, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She ran down the alley behind the buildings, keeping out of sight of the main street. The livery stable was at the edge of town, and she prayed she could reach it before Vernon spotted her. She was halfway there when a rough hand grabbed her arm, spinning her around. "Well, well," Vernon Blackburn sneered, his face flushed with anger and the early effects of whiskey. "Thought you'd run away again, did you?" Sarah tried to twist free, but his grip was like iron. "Let me go, Vernon." "You're my wife," he growled, shaking her violently. "You don't tell me what to do. You don't run away from me. Ever." He was a big man, nearly a foot taller than Sarah, with thick arms and a barrel chest. His face, once handsome in a rough way, was now bloated from drink. The eyes that had once charmed her were cold and mean. "I won't go back with you," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Vernon laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You don't have a choice, Sarah. You never did." He began dragging her toward where his horse was tied, his fingers digging painfully into her arm. Sarah struggled, digging her heels into the dirt. "Help!" she screamed. "Someone help me!" "Shut up," Vernon hissed, slapping her hard enough to make her ears ring. "I believe the lady asked you to let her go." Both Sarah and Vernon turned at the new voice. Hayes Calloway stood a few yards away, his stance casual, but his eyes hard as flint. "This ain't your business, mister," Vernon snarled. "This is my wife, and she's coming home with me." Hayes didn't move. "I didn't hear her agree to that." Vernon's face darkened with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Just a concerned citizen," Hayes replied evenly. "Now let her go before this gets ugly." Vernon released Sarah's arm, but only to reach for the gun at his hip. "You threatening me, boy?" Hayes moved so quickly that Sarah barely saw it. Suddenly, Vernon was on his knees, his arm twisted behind his back at a painful angle, his gun in Hayes's hand. "I don't make threats," Hayes said calmly. "Sarah, are you all right?" She nodded shakily, rubbing her arm where bruises were already forming. "You can't do this," Vernon gasped through his pain. "She's my wife. The law's on my side." "The law might be," Hayes agreed, "but I'm not. And right now, I'm the one holding the gun." He glanced at Sarah. "Get your things. We're leaving." "You can't take her," Vernon roared. Hayes twisted his arm a fraction more, making Vernon howl. "She's taking herself. I'm just providing the transportation." He looked at Sarah again. "Quickly now." Sarah hesitated only a moment before running back to the hotel. Mrs. Jensen was waiting anxiously by the back door. "Oh, thank God," the older woman breathed. "Are you hurt?" "Vernon's here, but Hayes, Mr. Calloway, he stopped him. I need to get my things. We're leaving." Mrs. Jensen's eyebrows shot up. "Hayes Calloway? How do you know? Never mind. Go, get your things. I'll pack you some food." Sarah raced upstairs, grabbing her few possessions and the money she'd saved. When she returned downstairs, Mrs. Jensen handed her a bundle of food and a canteen. "Be careful, Sarah," she warned. "Vernon won't give up easily." "I know," Sarah replied grimly. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Jensen." Outside, she found Hayes waiting with his horse. Vernon was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" she asked nervously. "Sheriff's office," Hayes replied. "Won't hold him long, but it buys us some time." He mounted his horse and extended a hand down to her. "We need to move fast." Sarah took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. "Why are you helping me?" "Questions later," he said, urging his horse into a trot. "For now, just hold on tight." Sarah wrapped her arms around his waist as they rode out of Fort McDowell, heading north into the harsh landscape. Despite the danger and uncertainty ahead, a small part of her felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. They rode hard for hours, stopping only to rest the horse. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they headed into the foothills, following trails that seemed invisible to Sarah's eyes, but that Hayes navigated with confidence. "We're taking a roundabout way," he explained during one brief stop. "Your husband will expect us to head straight for my ranch. We'll circle around, make it harder to track us." "He's good at finding me," Sarah said, the familiar fear creeping back. Hayes's expression hardened. "He'll find no trail here. I promise you that." As dusk fell, they reached a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. It was simple but sturdy looking, with a corral for horses and a small garden plot now dormant for the season. "Line shack," Hayes explained as he helped her dismount. "Use it when I'm working this part of the range. We'll stay here tonight. Continue to the main ranch tomorrow." Sarah's legs were stiff and sore from the unaccustomed riding. She stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground, and Hayes caught her elbow to steady her. "Sorry," she murmured. "No need to apologize. It was a hard ride." Inside, the cabin was sparse, but clean: a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves stocked with basic supplies. "It's not much," Hayes said, lighting a lantern, "but it's secure." Sarah stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly very aware that she was alone in a remote cabin with a man she barely knew. As if reading her thoughts, Hayes spoke again. "You take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. I won't—" "You're safe with me, Sarah. I give you my word." She studied him in the lantern light. His face was all angles and planes, weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind. Tired, but kind. "I believe you," she said softly. "And thank you. For everything." Hayes nodded, then began building a fire. Sarah set her bundle down on the bed and helped him prepare a simple meal from the provisions Mrs. Jensen had packed and those stored in the cabin. They ate in relative silence, both exhausted from the day's events. When they finished, Hayes cleared the dishes while Sarah sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. "How did you know?" she finally asked. "How did you know I needed help today?" Hayes settled into the chair opposite her. "I didn't. I was coming to town early, had a feeling I shouldn't wait. When I got there, I saw a big man asking about a dark-haired woman at the hotel. The way he asked, demanding, not asking, set me on edge. Then I heard shouting. 'Why did you intervene? He could have shot you.'" Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "My father was like your husband, mean, violent, especially when he drank, which was most of the time. He beat my mother regularly. Beat me too when I was too small to fight back." Sarah's chest tightened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. When I was 14, he beat her so badly she couldn't get out of bed for days. I tried to stop him, but—" He shook his head. "I was still too small. After that, I promised myself I'd never stand by and watch someone suffer if I could help. When I saw him grabbing you, heard how he spoke to you," his jaw tightened, "I couldn't walk away." "What happened to your mother?" Sarah asked softly. "She died when I was 16. Pneumonia, they said. But I think she just lost the will to live. My father drank himself to death 2 years later." "And you've been on your own since then?" Hayes nodded. "Worked ranches all over the territory. Saved enough to buy my own place about 5 years ago. It's small, but it's mine." Sarah stared into the fire, thinking about this man who had risked his life for a woman he barely knew, driven by memories of his own painful past. "Vernon will come looking for me," she said. "He always does." "Let him come," Hayes replied, his voice hardening. "My ranch is remote, defensible, and I'm not alone up there. I've got 2 hands who work for me, good men I trust. Vernon Blackburn won't find you an easy target this time." Sarah wanted to believe him, but fear had been her companion for so long. "You don't know him. He's persistent." "So am I," Hayes said simply. "Get some rest, Sarah. We've got another long ride tomorrow." Sarah lay awake long after Hayes had stretched out his bedroll near the fire. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees, a sound so different from the desert around Fort McDowell. She thought of Vernon, probably already tracking them, his rage building with every hour. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely helpless against him. She glanced at Hayes's sleeping form, his face relaxed in slumber, one arm thrown protectively over his gun belt, even as he slept. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an unspoken integrity that made her feel safer than she had in years. With that thought, Sarah finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. Morning came with frost on the ground and their breath visible in the cold cabin air. Hayes was already up, stoking the fire and brewing coffee when Sarah awoke. "Sleep all right?" he asked, handing her a steaming cup. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "How far to your ranch?" "About 4 hours if we push it. We should get moving soon. Your husband will be on our trail by now." They ate a quick breakfast, then packed up and headed out. The day was clear and cold, the landscape painted in shades of brown and gold as autumn tightened its grip on the high country. True to his word, Hayes led them on a circuitous route, often backtracking or taking seemingly random turns. Occasionally, he would dismount and brush away their tracks or lead the horse through rocky terrain that wouldn't hold footprints. "You've done this before," Sarah observed after one such maneuver. Hayes shrugged. "Apache country. You learn their tricks or you don't survive long." By midday, they crested a rise, and Hayes reined in his horse. Below them stretched a small valley, sheltered by hills on 3 sides. A creek ran through it, and clustered near the water were several buildings, a main house, a barn, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. "Calloway Ranch," Hayes said with quiet pride. "Not much compared to some spreads, but it's good land." It was beautiful, Sarah thought, a hidden paradise in the rugged landscape. As they rode down into the valley, she could see cattle grazing on the hillsides and horses in a corral near the barn. A man emerged from the bunkhouse as they approached, hand resting casually on his holstered gun until he recognized Hayes. "Boss, didn't expect you back so soon," he called, then noticed Sarah. His eyebrows rose, but he made no comment. "Sam," Hayes greeted him. "Where's Jed?" "Checking the North Range. What's happening? You're back early." Hayes dismounted, then helped Sarah down. "We've got trouble following us. A man named Vernon Blackburn. Big fellow, mean disposition. If he shows up, he's not welcome." Sam's eyes shifted to Sarah, understanding dawning. "Husband?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Won't be the first unwelcome visitor we've dealt with," Sam said with a grim smile. "I'll keep an eye out." Hayes led Sarah to the main house, a sturdy log structure larger than she had expected. Inside, it was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace, solid wooden furniture, and surprisingly homey touches, colorful woven blankets. Bookshelves filled with volumes, even a few landscape paintings on the walls. "It's lovely," Sarah said, genuinely surprised. Hayes looked pleased. "My mother loved beautiful things. I try to remember that when I'm fixing up the place." He showed her to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This is yours for as long as you need it. Get settled in. I need to talk to Sam about security measures." Left alone, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Just 24 hours ago, she'd been sweeping the hotel porch, counting days until her escape to California. Now she was in a strange man's home, miles from anywhere, with her enraged husband likely hunting for her. Yet somehow she felt safer than she had in years. Hayes returned an hour later, finding her in the kitchen examining his meager food supplies. "Hope you know how to cook," he said with a small smile, "because I'm terrible at it." Sarah couldn't help but smile back. "I can cook. It's the least I can do for all of this." She gestured around them. "You don't owe me anything," Hayes said firmly, "but I wouldn't turn down a meal that isn't beans and bacon." They fell into an odd but comfortable routine over the next few days. Sarah took over the cooking and much of the housekeeping, finding satisfaction in creating order and comfort. Hayes and his men increased their vigilance, taking turns keeping watch and patrolling the boundaries of the ranch. On the third evening, as they sat at the kitchen table after dinner, Sarah finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What happens next, Hayes? I can't stay here forever." He looked up from cleaning his gun, his expression thoughtful. "You can stay as long as you need to, but you're right, we need a plan." He reassembled the weapon with practiced ease. "You mentioned California before. Is that still where you want to go?" It was. It seemed far enough that Vernon wouldn't follow. But now? Sarah sighed, running her finger along the grain of the wooden table. "Now I don't know. He's followed me twice before. What's to stop him from following me all the way to California?" "Divorce," Hayes said bluntly. "Cut the legal ties. Make it so he has no claim on you." "Women don't often win divorce cases," Sarah said bitterly, "especially not against men like Vernon, who can charm a judge when it suits him." "What if there was evidence of his abuse?" Sarah touched her cheek where the bruise from Vernon's slap was still fading. "This isn't enough, and the rest have healed." Hayes set his gun aside. "There are other ways. Witnesses. Mrs. Jensen saw how frightened you were. The sheriff in Fort McDowell saw Vernon's behavior, and I saw him assault you." "It might work," Sarah admitted, "but I'd have to go back, face him in court." "Not necessarily. We could file papers in Prescott. It would take time, but—" He was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Both of them tensed, Hayes reaching for his gun. Sam appeared at the door a moment later. "Rider coming, just one from the south." Hayes nodded grimly. "Get Jed, both of you armed." "Already is," Sam confirmed, then disappeared. "Stay inside," Hayes told Sarah, checking his gun one last time before striding out. Sarah moved to the window, peering through the gathering dusk. A lone rider was approaching slowly, his figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. Even at a distance, she knew it wasn't Vernon. This man was smaller, riding a different horse. Hayes and his men formed a line in front of the house, guns ready but not raised. The rider stopped about 20 yards away, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "I'm looking for Hayes Calloway," the man called. "You found him," Hayes replied. "State your business." "Name's Jonah Miller. I'm a deputy from Fort McDowell. Sheriff sent me with a message." Hayes motioned for the man to approach, but kept his hand near his gun. Sarah watched as they spoke briefly, Hayes' expression growing increasingly serious. Finally he nodded and the deputy rode away. When Hayes returned to the house, his face was grim. "What is it?" Sarah asked, fear clutching at her heart. "Vernon Blackburn is dead." Sarah staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for support. "Dead? How?" "Got drunk at the saloon in Fort McDowell, picked a fight with the wrong man, pulled his gun, but the other fellow was faster." Hayes watched her carefully. "The deputy came to inform me because Vernon had been asking all over town about my ranch, making threats." Sarah sank into a chair, a storm of emotions washing over her: shock, disbelief, and something that felt shamefully like relief. "I don't know what to feel," she whispered. Hayes sat across from her. "You don't have to know right now. It's a lot to take in." "He was a horrible husband," Sarah said slowly. "He hurt me in ways I can't even describe, but I never wished him dead." "That's because you're a good person, Sarah." "Better than he deserved." She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "What do I do now? Where do I go?" Hayes reached across the table, hesitating before gently covering her hand with his. "That's entirely up to you. But you're welcome to stay here as long as you want. No obligations, no expectations." His hand was warm and rough from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. Sarah found herself turning her palm up to clasp his fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. That night, Sarah dreamed of Vernon. Not the violent, drunken man he'd become, but the charming young man who had courted her 4 years ago, bringing flowers and speaking of a future filled with promise. She woke with tears on her cheeks, mourning not the man who had died, but the man she had once thought he was. The following days were a strange limbo. Sarah continued her work around the house, finding comfort in the routine. Hayes gave her space, sensitive to her conflicted emotions, but he was always there if she wanted to talk. One evening, about a week after the news of Vernon's death, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of gold and crimson. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, breaking a comfortable silence, "about what comes next." Hayes turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. "And what have you decided?" "I'm not sure yet, but I know I don't want to run anymore." She took a deep breath. "Vernon's dead, but I still feel like I'm looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to appear. It's like his shadow is still following me." "It will take time," Hayes said gently. "You can't erase 4 years of fear overnight." "I know, but I want to try." She looked at him directly. "I'd like to stay, Hayes, at least for a while. I could keep house, cook, make myself useful while I figure things out." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features. "I'd like that. And you're already more than useful. This place hasn't been this clean or organized since, well, ever." Sarah laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd laughed freely. "But," Hayes continued more seriously, "I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel obligated or don't have other options." "I know," Sarah assured him. "I'm staying because I want to, because I feel safe here, and because—" She hesitated. Because I like being around you," she admitted, her cheeks warming. "You're a good man, Hayes Calloway. The first truly good man I've known in a long time." In the dying light, she saw his expression soften. "Thank you for that. It means more than you know." He stood, offering her his hand. "Come on, it's getting cold out here." As they walked back inside, Sarah felt something shift between them, a subtle change, like the first warm breeze after a long winter. Winter came early that year, blanketing the high country in snow by mid-November. The ranch settled into its cold weather routines, feeding cattle, breaking ice on water troughs, reinforcing buildings against the biting wind. Sarah found herself thriving despite the harsh conditions. The physical work kept her mind occupied, and each day brought a new sense of accomplishment. Her body grew stronger, the hollows in her cheeks filling out as she ate regular, hearty meals. Hayes noticed the change one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. "You look different," he observed. "Healthier." Sarah touched her cheek self-consciously. "Is that your way of saying I'm getting fat?" Hayes laughed. "No, you were too thin before. Now you look—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Vibrant." The compliment warmed her more than the fire. "It's easy to be vibrant when you're not afraid all the time." His expression turned serious. "Do you still think about him?" "Less each day," she admitted. "Sometimes I feel guilty about that." "Don't," Hayes said firmly. "He forfeited any right to your grief long ago." They fell silent, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Outside, the wind howled around the corners of the house, but inside was warm and secure. "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said suddenly, "for what you did that day in Fort McDowell. You could have been killed." Hayes shrugged. "Wasn't the first time I've faced down an angry man with a gun. Still, not many would have interfered in what most would consider a domestic matter." "Most people are cowards," Hayes said bluntly. "They see wrong being done and look away because it's easier." He stoked the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "I couldn't look away from you, Sarah, not from the first moment I saw you at that hotel." The simple honesty of his words took her breath away. "Why?" Hayes met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Because even though you were afraid, you had this determination about you, like a wounded animal that refuses to give up." He smiled slightly. "And because you have the most expressive eyes I've ever seen. They give away every thought in your head." "They do not," Sarah protested, smiling despite herself. "They do. Right now, you're thinking I'm talking nonsense, but you're pleased anyway." Sarah laughed. "Maybe you're just good at reading people." Only some people, he countered. I can read like a book. Their eyes held for a long moment, the atmosphere in the room shifting subtly. Sarah felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. Hayes cleared his throat and looked away first. It's getting late. I should check on the horses before turning in. Of course, Sarah said, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting. Good night, Hayes. Good night, Sarah, he replied softly, then donned his coat and stepped out into the snowy night. After he left, Sarah remained by the fire, her thoughts in turmoil. What was this feeling growing between them? Gratitude, friendship, or something more complex and frightening? Vernon had been dead just over a month. Was it disrespectful to be having these thoughts so soon? But then, their marriage had died long before Vernon did, killed by his cruelty and violence, and Hayes was different, so different from Vernon that they hardly seemed to be the same species, let alone the same gender. Where Vernon had been loud and domineering, Hayes was quiet and respectful. Where Vernon took, Hayes gave. Where Vernon had made her feel worthless, Hayes made her feel valued. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive atmosphere despite the isolation of the ranch. Sarah decorated the house with pine boughs and berries and baked special treats with the hoarded supplies. Hayes watched her preparations with amusement. Haven't had a proper Christmas since my mother died, he commented as she hung a handmade wreath on the front door. Then you're long overdue, Sarah replied. Christmas should be celebrated, especially out here where it's so easy to lose track of special days. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged simple gifts by the fire. Sarah had knitted Hayes a new scarf from yarn she'd found in a trunk, while he presented her with a beautifully carved wooden box for her few treasures. It's beautiful, she exclaimed, running her fingers over the intricate flower pattern on the lid. Did you make this? Hayes nodded, looking pleased at her reaction. Been working on it in the barn when you weren't looking. Not much else to do during the long winter evenings. I love it, Sarah said sincerely. It's the nicest gift I've ever received. They sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the warmth of the fire and each other's company. Outside, snow fell gently, muffling the world in white. I have something to ask you, Hayes said finally, his voice unusually hesitant, and I want you to know that you can say no. It won't change anything here. Sarah looked at him curiously. What is it? Hayes took a deep breath. When spring comes, I need to drive some cattle to Prescott for sale. It's about a week's journey each way. I was wondering if you might consider coming with me. To Prescott? Sarah asked, surprised. Yes. You mentioned once that you'd like to file divorce papers. Make a clean break legally. Even though Vernon is gone, it might help you feel finished with that part of your life. Sarah considered the idea. She was legally still Mrs. Vernon Blackburn, a name she no longer wanted to bear. You're right. I would like that closure. Hayes nodded, looking relieved. Good. That's settled then. But there's more, isn't there? Sarah pressed, sensing his continued unease. What aren't you saying, Hayes? He stood and paced to the window, staring out at the falling snow. I was also thinking that while we're in Prescott, we could visit the territorial offices, file a homestead claim in your name. Sarah's eyes widened. A homestead? For me? Hayes turned back to face her. There's good land available to the west of my property. As a widow, you're eligible to claim it. It would be yours, Sarah. Land that no one could take from you, a place of your own. The enormity of what he was suggesting struck her. Her own land, independence, security that didn't depend on anyone else's goodwill. Why would you do this for me? She asked softly. Hayes returned to his seat beside her. Because you deserve a chance to build something for yourself. Because I've seen how hard you work and how quickly you learn about ranching. And because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. Because, Sarah prompted. Because I care about your future, he finished, though she sensed that wasn't what he had originally intended to say. Impulsively, Sarah leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Thank you, Hayes, for everything. He looked startled by the gesture, his hand rising to touch the spot where her lips had been. "You're welcome," he said hoarsely. That night, lying in her bed listening to the wind, Sarah thought about Hayes's offer. Land of her own represented a freedom she had never dared to imagine, but it also meant eventually leaving the safety and comfort of Hayes's home and Hayes himself. The realization troubled her more than she wanted to admit. Winter gradually released its grip on the high country, snow melting to reveal tender green shoots beneath. The cattle, thin from the long winter, began to fatten on the new grass. The days grew longer, and with them, preparations for the cattle drive to Prescott increased. "We'll take 30 head, Hayes explained as they went over the plans. "Enough to make the trip worthwhile, but not so many we can't manage with just 4 of us." "4?" Sarah asked, looking up from the list of supplies she was compiling. "You, me, Sam, and Jed," Hayes clarified. "Unless you've changed your mind about coming?" "No, I want to come. I just wasn't sure you were counting me as one of the drovers." Hayes smiled. "You've learned more about handling cattle in 4 months than most cowboys learn in a year. Of course I'm counting you." The pride in his voice made her stand a little straighter. It was true she had thrown herself into learning ranch work, initially as a distraction from her grief and confusion, but later out of genuine interest. Hayes had been a patient teacher, showing her how to ride properly, how to move among the cattle without spooking them, even how to use a lariat. 2 weeks later, they set out for Prescott with the small herd. Sarah rode proudly alongside Hayes, dressed in practical clothes, denim pants, a flannel shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. Mrs. Jensen would have been scandalized, but out here, practicality trumped propriety. The journey was hard but exhilarating. Days were spent in the saddle, moving the cattle along at a steady pace. Nights were spent around the campfire, eating simple meals and sharing stories. Sarah had never felt so free, so connected to the land and sky around her. On the 3rd night, as Sam and Jed slept and Hayes took the first watch, Sarah joined him at the edge of camp. "Can't sleep?" he asked as she settled beside him. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. "It's strange I've never been to Prescott, but I feel like I'm going back, not forward." "Because of the divorce papers?" She nodded. "That, and I don't know. When Vernon died, I thought I was free. But legally filing for divorce, stating for the record what kind of man he was, it feels like I'm confronting him one last time." "You're reclaiming your story," Hayes said. "It takes courage." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The cattle were quiet, occasionally shifting and sighing in their sleep. "Hayes? What happens after? After Prescott, after I file my claim? What then?" He turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by the dying campfire. "That depends on what you want, Sarah." "What if I don't know what I want?" she asked softly. Hayes reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then you take your time figuring it out. There's no rush." His touch lingered on her cheek, and Sarah found herself leaning into it slightly. "And what do you want, Hayes Calloway?" For a moment she thought he might not answer. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "You know what I want, Sarah." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah's heart raced, but not with fear, with anticipation, with possibility. Slowly, giving him every chance to pull away, she leaned toward him. Hayes remained still, watching her with those storm cloud eyes, until their lips met in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief, just a whisper of contact, but when they parted, Sarah felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. Hayes's expression was one of wonder and restraint. "I shouldn't have done that," Sarah whispered, though she didn't move away. "Why not?" Hayes asked, his voice rough. "Because it's too soon. Because I'm still legally married to a dead man. Because you've done so much for me already, and I don't want you to think that I'm—" Hayes stopped her with a finger to her lips. "Sarah, I have never, not for one moment, thought you were offering anything but friendship. If that's all you ever want from me, it's enough." And if I want more? The words escaped before she could stop them. His eyes darkened. Then we take it slow, day by day. No expectations, no obligations. Just two people figuring things out together. Sarah nodded, a smile spreading across her face. I'd like that. Hayes returned her smile, then gently pulled her against his side, his arm around her shoulders as they continued their watch under the vast, star-filled sky. Prescott bustled with activity. So different from the isolated ranch or the small settlement of Fort McDowell. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the noise and crowd as they rode in, the cattle lowing nervously at the unfamiliar surroundings. They delivered the herd to the stockyards, where Hayes negotiated a fair price with the buyer. With the business concluded, he turned to Sarah. Ready to visit the courthouse? She nodded, though her stomach churned with nervousness. Together, they made their way to the imposing stone building in the center of town. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Because Vernon was deceased, the clerk explained, Sarah could file a simple petition declaring the marriage dissolved. There would be no contest, no need to prove abuse or abandonment. You'll need to publish a notice in the territorial paper, the clerk said, handing her the necessary forms. Standard procedure, even with a deceased spouse. After 30 days, you'll be legally Sarah. He paused, looking at her questioningly. Bennett, she supplied, reclaiming her maiden name. Sarah Bennett. As they left the courthouse, Sarah felt lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It feels strange, she admitted to Hayes, like I'm becoming someone new. Not new, he corrected. Just yourself again. Their next stop was the land office, where Hayes helped Sarah navigate the complex paperwork for a homestead claim. The agent was initially skeptical of a woman filing alone, but Hayes's calm insistence and Sarah's clear knowledge of ranching won him over. The parcel adjoins Mr. Calloway's ranch to the west, the agent confirmed, marking it on a map. 160 acres. You'll need to live on it continuously for 5 years and make improvements to gain full ownership. I understand, Sarah said firmly. Later, at the hotel where they'd taken rooms for the night, Sarah spread the map on a small table, studying the outline of her future property. It looks so small on paper, she mused as Hayes joined her. But it won't feel small when you're fencing it, he said with a smile. 160 acres is a lot of land for one person to manage. Sarah looked up at him. I'll manage. I've learned from the best. Hayes's expression softened. You know you don't have to do it alone, right? My offer still stands. You can stay at the ranch as long as you need while you build your place. And if I never want to leave? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Hayes went very still. What are you saying, Sarah? She took a deep breath. I'm saying that these past 5 months at your ranch have been the happiest of my life. I'm saying that I care for you, Hayes Calloway, more than I thought I could ever care for another man. And I'm saying that while I appreciate the independence this land represents, what I want most is a future with you in it. Hayes moved around the table and took her hands in his. Are you sure, Sarah? After everything you've been through, I wouldn't blame you if you never wanted to tie yourself to a man again. You're nothing like him, she said firmly. You've shown me what a good man is, what a partnership can be. I'm not afraid of that, not with you. Hayes lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you at that hotel, looking over your shoulder like a hunted deer. I kept telling myself it was too soon, that you needed time to heal. But Sarah Bennett, if you'll have me, I would be honored to build a life with you. Tears of happiness filled Sarah's eyes. I will have you, Hayes Calloway, with all my heart. He pulled her into his arms then, his kiss no longer hesitant but full of promise and passion. Sarah melted against him, feeling for the first time in years that she was exactly where she belonged. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Sam and Jed as witnesses and a traveling preacher officiating. Sarah wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair. Hayes couldn't take his eyes off her. Never thought I'd see the boss look so happy, Sam commented to Jed as they watched the couple exchange vows. Never thought I'd see a woman brave enough to take him on, Jed replied with a grin. They're well matched, those two. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. Mrs. Jensen had made the journey from Fort McDowell, bringing a magnificent wedding cake and her heartfelt congratulations. I knew there was something special between you two, she told Sarah as they watched Hayes talking with the men. The way he looked at you in the hotel like you were something precious he'd just discovered. He saved me, Sarah said simply. Mrs. Jensen shook her head. No, dear. He helped you save yourself. There's a difference. As night fell, the guests departed for the bunkhouse, leaving Sarah and Hayes alone in the main house, their home now. Hayes built up the fire while Sarah changed out of her wedding dress, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. When she emerged in her nightgown and robe, Hayes was waiting by the fire, his expression tender as he held out his hand to her. Come here, Mrs. Calloway, he said softly. Sarah went to him willingly, stepping into the circle of his arms. I like the sound of that, she whispered against his chest. So do I. He tipped her face up to his. Are you happy, Sarah? Truly happy. More than I ever thought possible, she replied honestly. Are you? His smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. Happier than I deserve to be. I love you, Sarah, with everything I am. And I love you, Hayes, for saving me, for believing in me, for showing me what love should be. His kiss was gentle at first, then increasingly urgent as they gave themselves to each other fully, without reservation or fear. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Hayes traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. What are you thinking? Sarah asked, nestled against his side. That your husband's shadow's finally gone, he replied. That you're free of him, completely and forever. Sarah smiled, remembering his words that day in Fort McDowell. He'll find no trail here. Hayes had been right. Vernon's shadow couldn't follow her to this place, to this love. What about you? Hayes asked. What are you thinking? Sarah propped herself up on one elbow, gazing down at his beloved face in the moonlight streaming through the window. I'm thinking about our future. About building something together that neither of us could create alone. I like the sound of that, Hayes said, pulling her back down beside him. A future together. That's all I want, Sarah. That's everything. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, the Calloway ranch flourished under their joint care. Sarah's homestead claim became part of the larger ranch, doubling their holdings. They built a new, larger house at the junction of their properties, a symbol of their united lives. Word spread about the quality of Calloway cattle, and buyers came from as far as California. With the increased income, they hired more hands and expanded their operation. Sarah took particular pride in starting a small horse breeding program, applying the knowledge she'd gained during her months of intensive learning. 2 years after their wedding, their son was born a healthy, strong boy they named Daniel after Hayes's grandfather. He had his father's storm cloud eyes and his mother's determined spirit. He's perfect, Hayes whispered, holding his son for the first time, his voice choked with emotion. He is, Sarah agreed, exhausted but radiant. Our new beginning. As Daniel grew, so did the ranch and their family. A daughter, Lily, joined them 3 years later, followed by another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. Their home was filled with laughter, occasional tears, and the constant reassuring love that Sarah and Hayes shared. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes surprised Sarah with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children on one side and the two of them on the other. To remind you of how far we've come, he said as he fastened it around her neck, and all we've built together. Sarah touched the locket reverently, then kissed him with all the love in her heart. I don't need reminding, she said. Every day with you is a gift I never take for granted. That night, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. Hayes's arm was around her shoulders, holding her close against the evening chill. Any regrets? He asked softly. About the path your life has taken? Sarah thought about the frightened young woman she had been, running from a violent husband, looking over her shoulder in constant fear. She thought about the day Hayes Calloway had stepped between her and danger, offering protection without demands. She thought about the slow, beautiful blossoming of their love and the life they had created together. "Not one," she replied, turning to kiss him under the starlit sky. "Not one single regret." Vernon Blackburn's shadow was long gone, banished by the light of a love that had healed old wounds and created new beginnings. In its place was the solid, comforting presence of the man who had taught Sarah to trust again, to love again, to believe in herself again. As Hayes drew her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that still held all the passion of their early days, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she was home, not just in this house or on this land, but in Hayes's arms, the one place where she had always been truly free.